I'm back. I'm hoping that this shows me more of me and doesn't cut me off here. So, this will continue now. So as I said, each class will discuss one form of abuse and neglect, and I think in the syllabus for child abuse and neglect, I mean for child sexual abuse, we'll have two classes on child sexual abuse, which I think will be really helpful to you, not only for deepening your understanding of child sexual abuse, but many of the things about child sexual abuse are actually applicable to other forms of abuse and neglect. So we'll discuss in each class basic practice principles and policy, program principles underlying effective responses to child abuse and neglect. And on almost every class, maybe not every class, you'll also have a time for application of course learnings. You'll have Moodle postings, and one of them I used it the first time last semester, and it worked quite well. And that is to post, over the course of the semester, you'd post reflections on 4 classes. So say class 3, you could post a reflection, then class 5, and that's class 7 and class 9. So you only have to do 4. And I'll talk about that more later, but I just found that very helpful, and I think the students really appreciated the opportunity as well to reflect on the class itself. But you'll also have Moodle postings every week on the secret life of bees, because the life of Lily is a great application of almost every learning that we have in this class. What happens in that novel reflects beautifully what I want you to learn from this course. And we'll spend some time on mindfulness-based practice. I am a big believer in mindfulness-based practice for social workers and people in the area of abuse and neglect and other forms of trauma, because, you know, as much as we might care about the people who are abused and neglected, it often affects us as well, and so we can start feeling vulnerable and experience secondary trauma. So reflective practice is a really good way of dealing with secondary trauma. And even if you're in a field where you don't experience secondary trauma, reflective practice is still a very good thing to do, and mindfulness will help you reflect on what's happening for clients, and what's happening in the systems that clients are embedded in, and what's happening to you, and what's happening to you in terms of the systems that you're embedded in. So it just makes you a much more aware practitioner. So I thought I would go over the syllabus with you now. And this is a course, of course, on child abuse and neglect, intervention and prevention. And it's important for you to know some basic ideas. And I think some of you are quite familiar with a lot of these ideas, and that is, children have always been mistreated from the beginning of time. I think it's just the nature of being small and vulnerable that there are certain other people who will mistreat children. Now, of course, most parents probably don't, and most parents, when they do something that might hurt their children, they might not even know that this is hurtful for the children. So there's a great place for education of parents about what hurts children and how can they help the children work through the effects of the hurt, and what can they do to repair the relationships. Because if parents hurt their children, children might start mistrusting the parents, and that's it's not good for children's development, and it's not good for the parents' sense of themselves as parents and as human beings. So the notion of developmental repair is really important in child abuse and neglect. And it's really important in parenting overall. In fact, it's really important in all relationships, because we all mess up and we're all going to hurt each other, people we care about. And so we have to know how to offer to repair any breaks there are in the trust. So, but there are probably 3 million reports every year in the United States, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. We don't know how many more children than that are being abused and neglected, but we do know that that many are reported. And less than a third of them are found to require intervention from child protection. It doesn't mean that the other 2 million plus don't need services. They do, but child protection is so underfunded and the workers are so undertrained, and the resources, the services available to children who are abused and neglected are so sparse that we just don't do well with the kids who actually get services, but we don't even offer services to many of the cases where it's pretty obvious the family needs something. So there are serious issues with who gets reported. The poor are much more likely to be reported. Children of color are much more likely to be taken into the child welfare system than white children, even when the abuse and neglect is similar. So there's a huge problem with racial disproportionality in child protection. We as professionals and mandatory reporters, we don't have a choice. If we know or have reason to believe that a child is being abused and or neglected, then we are required to report it. And if we don't report it, we are open to be charged with a misdemeanor. And it's unpleasant to have to go through that. So there's a great need for mindful policy that is actually helpful to the maltreatment of children, and there are many factors that contribute to it. You know, parental stress. Most parents who are stressed might be psychologically unavailable to their children because they're preoccupied by the stress. And so that is a form of emotional neglect, and that's very common, and it's almost never reported. I think emotional neglect, all children experience it at some time, but most parents recognize that they've been neglectful because they've been preoccupied, and they will hopefully make up for it. But we do have to recognize that stress and preoccupation go together, and when that happens, there can be psychological unavailability and therefore a little bit of emotional maltreatment. So we can't probably legislate parents being more emotionally available. We can do public relations campaigns and some social marketing campaigns to make parents aware of how important it is to be sensitively responsive to their children, and when they're not, to acknowledge that they haven't been and say, you know, now I'm sorry that I wasn't available and now I am. So neglect is the most prevalent, and psychological maltreatment is probably the most prevalent, and that's a form of neglect. But often when people talk about neglect as the most prevalent form of child maltreatment, what they're meaning is physical neglect, like not giving the children proper food, or not giving them enough food, or not clothing the children, or not having adequate housing, and so those are forms of physical neglect. But the psychological maltreatment is, as I said, is very serious. There's such a thing as medical neglect as well, and that's pretty common. And often the parents don't have the money, and that's where we have to look at that. What are the circumstances that parents aren't taking their children to the doctors? What are the circumstances that they don't have enough food, they don't have adequate housing, they don't have adequate clothing? Is it poverty? And so poverty and abuse and neglect, people of color, and social justice all go together. So whenever we're working with cases, especially of neglect, that we really have to think in broad terms. What's going on with this family? What are the circumstances under which the family lives? What services can we bring to the family? Are we even going to offer services to the family? So physical abuse is reported often, and at this point in the history of child abuse and neglect, even kids who are known to have been physically abused don't necessarily get services. It's as if in some counties the kids' lives have to be at stake before anything happens, and that's really serious. And so we have to figure out how can we support the agencies and not jump all over them and criticize them. They're just underfunded, undertrained, under-resourced, and as I said, there just aren't programs and services for families, and so that's why this happens. It doesn't happen because kids don't get services because the social workers don't care. It's they simply don't have the resources. Sexual abuse is widely reported too. And another form of abuse and neglect that we're going to cover in this course is relational aggression. And that relational aggression means people do things to other people to damage their relationships with others. And of course, when you do things that damage the relationships of others, you also are harming the person who's the target of relational aggression. And we'll be talking about bullying as well, and sibling abuse. And sibling abuse is very important and probably not dealt with adequately. So let me go over the syllabus with you now. The syllabus is posted on Moodle. I probably should, I'll be sending an email, which you have gotten by now, telling you that the syllabus is on Moodle and you can look at it. But this is a social work course, and by the end of the course, you'll be able to understand what child abuse and neglect means to child survivors and to other persons such as parents that the maltreatment affects. Child survivors often believe that something bad has happened to them, and I don't think they're wrong. Child abuse and neglect is no advantage. Child survivors often believe that something bad happened to them, therefore they are bad. And that's a serious core issue. How can we help these kids work through the idea that they're not bad? They've received treatment that's hurt them. But blame the victim beliefs are prevalent in the United States, and they influence how children interpret the meanings of their own abuse and neglect. And there are various cultural, social, and economic and political factors that you will understand as a result of this course. And you'll be positioned to contribute to child abuse and neglect prevention as at the primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. So we'll talk more about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention, but primary means that whatever you're doing it to affect the total population. Secondary prevention efforts are aimed at people who have risks for the behavior, but they might not have actually committed, say, child abuse and neglect. And tertiary prevention is for people who have experienced child abuse and neglect or who have perpetrated it. So we'll also be talking about ethical issues and dilemmas related to intervention and prevention. So these are the kinds of things that I want you to understand by the end of the course. So for students, I expect you to read these assigned materials. I mean, the class does have a lot of content, and I can't possibly cover everything, so please don't expect an A if you haven't done the readings. And I mean that. I think it's really important for you to take the time to do the readings. I mean, if you're going to work in the field of child abuse and neglect, it's important to understand that you're going to affect the life course and life chances of the people you're dealing with. So if you have a half-baked idea of what the issues are, you're putting people in jeopardy. So it's up to you to know the most that you can. I see a bird about this big climbing up my elm tree. I wonder what it is. It's not too cold out. So I expect you to that you're prepared for class through reading the course material, through taking notes, posting on Moodle, reflecting on course material. I want you to turn your phones and pagers off. The only time you can leave them on is if you have a family member who's sick. And don't text, and if I see you texting, I'm going to call you out. I might not call you out in front of everybody the first time. I'll speak to you privately, but if you keep doing it, I'm going to say it in front of the whole class. So you're not to surf the web with any electronic devices, and I can tell. I can see how your eyes are moving, I can see you giggle, I can see you do things. There are all kinds of signs that an experienced professor can spot when students are surfing, so believe me. And you may use your computers during class, but only to take notes. Only to take notes. I can't emphasize that enough. I expect you to attend all class sessions, arrive on time, and participate in class activities. You must have access to the internet, you must be familiar with how to use Moodle, and you have to use resources on the World Wide Web. You're also going to download articles from the library. I do not make articles available on Moodle or anywhere else, and the reason for that is it's very important when people write articles that they get credit for the number of times people download it. So take it from me as I'm an academic, I'm a researcher. I know how important it is to have a lot of downloads of your articles. So you must notify me in advance whenever possible that you're going to be late, that you're going to be absent. And also, if you're going to leave class early, tell me. It's very rude to get up and leave. Take it from me, it not only affects me, but it affects your classmates. So I want you to be considerate. And all your assignments have to be printed. And you have to write in non-sexist language. You have to follow the format of the American Psychological Association publication manual. And you must turn in your, all papers and writings have to be turned in with no errors in spelling, punctuation, or grammar. And when you want to give me feedback, I expect you to be respectful, as I'm respectful to you, I hope. And that you make sure it's constructive feedback, because I'm not perfect and I like constructive feedback. I don't like people yelling at me and calling me names, which of course I don't expect you to do. And in class as well, I expect you to respect the points of view of others. If you don't agree with somebody else, don't start yelling at them. Just say, I appreciate your point of view, I have another point of view. So if you miss 4 or more classes, you'll fail the class, unless you can document that you have a medical condition. And then you still have to do all the course assignments. And coming to class late is very disruptive, so don't come to class late. I mean, sometimes you might not be able to avoid it, but in general, don't come to class late. And now, eating in class may be necessary because of your schedule or for your health reasons. But don't eat food that crunches and makes noise and snaps. And if you're going to eat soup, don't go and then keep scraping the bottom of the bowl. Don't do that. I don't know, I may have sensory issues, I don't know, but it really bothers me, and I know it bothers some students. And also, if you're unwrapping, don't have stuff that's wrapped, because when I hear that, it seems like it takes 20 minutes to get, a piece of candy out of a wrapper, or, a potato chip out of a bag. So, no potato chips, no crunchy things, nothing in bags, nothing that's wrapped. So, if you submit an assignment that's not yours, you'll fail the course. You won't just get a failing grade for the assignment, you're going to fail the course. This is in accordance with the policies of the School of Social Work and the University Student Conduct Code regarding plagiarism. Plagiarism is a use of the material of others without attribution. Now, a few students did that last semester in this class. And so, I don't know if they did it on purpose or not. Wait a minute, it wasn't in this class, it was in another class. But students do that occasionally. So if I see that you just got 2 or 3 sentences that are plagiarized, I'll say, look, you might not have realized you've done this, and so I'll show them the passage that they didn't attribute correctly, and I'll give you a chance. But if it's just 2 or 3 sentences, but if it goes on, for paragraphs and pages, then I'm not sure I'm going to give you a second chance for something that blatant. So, it's important to give credit to the work of others. You refer your readers to the source material. There are many reasons not to plagiarize and to attribute your sources, and it's all laid out in the syllabus. You can't use an assignment from another class for this course, and if you do, you won't be given credit for that assignment. And incompletes are given in extraordinary circumstances, and if you need an incomplete, you need to tell me early, like 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the semester. When students use material from their professional or personal experiences, please, as professionals, we must protect the privacy and confidentiality of others, so disguise that material. Now, course expectations for me, and this is all in the syllabus, and I'm just going over it, and I'm sorry that I'm just going through it, and it might be boring. And if you don't want to listen to this part of the video, you go ahead, but make sure you know what's in the syllabus. Because if you come up to me and ask me a question and it's in the syllabus, I might be polite about it, but I also notice that you haven't read the syllabus. So, read the syllabus. I belong to an online group of professors, and I can't tell you how much professors talk about students coming to them and asking them questions that are in the syllabus. Some of them have flashcards, so they whip it out. When somebody asks a question, they hold up the flashcard. It's in the syllabus. Chances are they went over the syllabus in the first class as well. So, please, it's in the syllabus. This class meets on Mondays from 1:55 to 4:25 during the spring semester. We typically have one 10-minute break halfway through the course. We'll discuss sensitive topics, and in order to create a constructive and supporting learning environment, your instructor expects all class members to participate in class discussions, to listen well to others, respect various opinions, and avoid degrading or disrespectful language, and understand the multicultural atmosphere of the learning environment. That there'll be students from various different countries in this class, as well as different cultures, within the United States. So we have to be sensitive and respectful. We have to be present to other students, and it's really important to just listen. Just listen. And sometimes I won't want you to respond. I just want you to sit and think about it. So there are 3 required texts and required readings through online resources at the university library. So, the texts are a book that I'm giving you. It's called The Needs of Child and Family Assessment. I'm giving you a book on child abuse and neglect. Sue Monk Kids' book on the secret life of bees, and then Joy Osofsky's. As a matter of fact, as I look at this, there are 4 required readings now because I added child sexual abuse 3 or 4 readings from that book, so I'll consider that a text as well. So, to summarize course requirements, there'll be weekly reading assignments that I expect you to do and to be prepared to discuss in class. In fact, I have a format that I want you to follow in order to structure your responses to the readings. There'll be weekly postings on the secret life of bees. There'll be occasional homework assignments that you will share in class. There'll be 4 reflections over the semester on Moodle. There'll be a midterm exam and a final exam or a final exam. You can do a final project or a final exam. So, I already emphasized enough how important it is to do the class readings. And I'll pause now because it's getting dark out and I might need to put more light in here so you can see me.